Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello and welcome to Your Family's Health. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. You probably heard about Tourette Syndrome and the tics associated with it. But today, not only will you learn more about the disease, but we will learn about the organization that provides support for children, families, and adults with Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders across the nation. My guest today is Amanda Talty, the president and CEO of Tourette Association of America. Amanda, welcome to Your Family's Health with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today, Jeanine.
Glad to have you. So first, tell us about you. What connected you to Tourette's, and tell us your story.
I guess the short version of my story is to say that I've always been very passionate about mental health and how families need the appropriate level of support from not only their immediate community, their friends, their loved ones, but also from the clinical community and the wider general public. So that's what really attracted me to the Tourette Association, as us being the only organization that serves the Tourette syndrome and tic disorder community. It really resonated with me, the experiences that individuals living with it have, the stresses and strains that can impact the caregivers, and just generally wanted to make sure that this organization would be around for another 50 years to support these folks that need it.
So you started the organization. Is it that someone in your family was connected to Tourette syndrome, or it was just a personal journey for you?
Well, I can't take credit for starting the organization. I wish I could. We are actually in our 50th anniversary year, and our organization, like many patient advocacy organizations, began around a kitchen table in 1972 by 4 families who were affected by Tourette syndrome and saw that there was a need for connectivity and a need to raise awareness for the condition. So I cannot take credit for the starting of the organization, but I'm certainly happy to be a part of its long history.
So let's start with basics. What is Tourette syndrome?
So Tourette syndrome is a condition. It's a neurological condition that manifests in movements and sounds in an individual when they don't want to make those movements and sounds. So it does start in the brain. There are some genetic components to it. And it's something that affects 1 in 50 school-age children. So it's much more prevalent than we had initially believed it to be.
Tics can come from many forms. I think most people associate it with random explicatives being shouted out or words. And I read that this is called coprolalia. Is this right? Tell me about that.
That's correct. Coprolalia is the symptom that is most often characterized in the media. Many people who are aware of Tourette syndrome associate it as the cursing disorder. Right. But it does, that particular symptom, coprolalia of Tourette syndrome, only affects about 10 to 20% of the larger population. Tics can vary, really. They can be very, very mild, something as mild as eye blinking or throat clearing or sniffing, to the very severe, which are self-injurious tics. So it is a spectrum disorder, and it is a lifelong condition.
Has there been a rise with Tourette syndrome over the years? Because I don't hear much about that in years past. Is it, and what is the association there?
I don't think that the prevalence of Tourette syndrome is any higher, but I do think the work of the association over the last 50 years to elevate awareness and understanding around the condition has resulted in increased knowledge and increased prevalence rates. If you look at autism as an example, at one point that was thought to be a very rare condition too. But as we've seen in that patient community, with education and awareness and efforts to spread the word, it was very clear that autism was affecting by far more people. And I think Tourette syndrome falls in that same space. It is a condition that I think because of the characterization in the media, people think it's something that it isn't. It is a condition that is not necessarily well known in the clinical community and can at times be dismissed because transient tics can be typical in most children during the developmental process. But it's when those tics do not go away, when they continue, and when they eventually can become disruptive in an individual's life, that the diagnosis is needed and required, but is very often hard to come by because it's a resource-intensive diagnosis. You have to have good access to healthcare. You have to have access to good neurologists. There are a lot of pieces that need to fall into place. And we know that currently families report it can take up to 2 years to get a diagnosis. And if you think about the life of a child, symptoms typically begin between the ages of 5 and 7. So 2 years of a journey to finally get that diagnosis at that age, it can really affect a child's long-term outcomes.
So what other forms can tics present themselves as?
Blinking, sniffing, coughing, foot tapping, finger tapping, certainly whistling. Whistling can be a tic. Really anything that is done repetitively, either motor or vocal, although some tics can be more complex. So, I've known individuals who they have coprolalia, but they're not uttering necessarily inappropriate words and phrases. They are just saying something that is living in their subconscious. So, for example, we had an event with many of our youth ambassadors, and our youth ambassadors are teenagers between the ages of 12 and 18 who come to Washington, D.C. and work with us to become self-advocates and also work with us to advocate at the federal level for a partnership with the CDC and funding that is associated with that. But there was one event where, for whatever reason, one of the young people in the room was ticking cream cheese, and then somebody else began ticking bagels. So there is a suggestibility around the tics as well, depending on where on the spectrum you fall and how mild, moderate, or severe your tics can be. But it can really be anything.
So is Tourette syndrome and tics, is that considered neurologic or behavioral?
It's neurologic.
Okay.
It is a neurological condition.
So when you talk about coprolalia, this is not something that can be altered with behavioral modifications or therapy. This is something that's strictly neurologic, and therefore medications are indicated for this particular syndrome? There
are 3 medications that are currently indicated. Most individuals who are on a medicinal therapy typically get prescribed other medications that are off-label. And this is really because with Tourette syndrome and persistent tic disorders, there is an overlap with other conditions such as ADHD and OCD. Mm-hmm. About 80% of individuals living with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder also have one of these, what we call co-occurring conditions. It can be anxiety, OCD, there is some overlap with autism as well. And so treatment strategies, when we talk about medicinal therapeutics, can get tricky because there are, for example, if you're prescribed a stimulant to treat your ADHD, that could potentially exacerbate your motor tics because it's stimulating your body overall. Right. So there is this delicate balance. There is a behavioral therapy for the treatment of tics specifically, and it is called CBIT, Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention Therapy. Okay. And this is really even though Tourette syndrome is neurologic, individuals living with it can learn to modify or counterbalance, although it's hard. And the more complex your tics are, the harder you're going to have the treatment. The treatment may not be as effective for you if you have particularly severe or complex tics. But CBIT does indeed, a CBIT trained therapist will work with an individual to engage in what I would say is habit reversal. Although when I say that, I certainly don't want to give the impression that tics are by any means a deliberate habit, but that is what it is considered in the behavioral modification world. So if your tic is to, let's say, raise your arm above your head when you feel what they call a premonitory urge, which is really, if you think about yourself when you go to sneeze, that feeling you get before you sneeze, you know you're about to sneeze. Mm-hmm. And then that feeling stays with you until you finally let it out. Mm-hmm. That's the closest thing to a premonitory urge, if I were to describe it. So when an individual feels that, if their tic is to elevate their arm above their head, which can be very ostracizing, right? If you're in a public environment, why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep raising your arm above your head? What CBIT does is you actually train yourself to counteract that tic by doing a opposite motion. So the recommended motion might be push your hand down into your chair and hold it there until the urge to elevate your arm over your head passes. So that can be successful. Certainly early intervention is key. Again, going back to diagnosis and challenges around diagnosis, the earlier you engage in that behavioral therapy, the more success you can have with it. And about 30% of people who go through CBIT find success with it long term, which is about the same as people who go on medication in terms of tic severity being lessened. So it can be effective, but it is indeed a modification. Mm-hmm. So you cannot stop or suppress the tic. It really is a conscious, deliberate effort to retrain your brain to make you do something different that isn't as noticeable or as offensive. So for example, people who have coprolalia, and I've known a few who would tic the word bomb anytime they went to the airport. So you can imagine that's not the word you want to yell out when you're in the middle of an airport. Many of them would do their best to modify, and instead of saying the word bomb, they would say but. They would just try to make a conscious effort to modify it. So this way, the brain gets the release that it needs. Oh, you've done the tic, but it's not in its entirety in such a manner that it would cause an issue in society. So it's a very nuanced condition, as I'm sure you and your audience will gather from hearing me speak about it. It really is very nuanced and individual. Each person with Tourette syndrome and a tic disorder, they each experience it very differently than others. There's clearly some commonalities, but how it affects them, how they're able to manage it, all of that is very unique to each person.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today you're learning about an organization that provides support for children, families, and adults with Tourette syndrome and tic disorder across the nation. My guest today is Amanda Talty, the president and CEO of the Tourette Association of America. So, Amanda, how is this Tourette syndrome diagnosed?
It's most often diagnosed by a neurologist. It can be diagnosed through observation. And if you're lucky enough to have a pediatrician or a primary care physician who is familiar with it, you may get diagnosed by them. Psychiatrists are also often a diagnosing physician. The criteria that you have to fill, though, can be a little bit complicated to satisfy. So tics can change even in the same individual. They can change daily. They can change potentially weekly. And according to the DSM, you must have a motor tic and at least 2 motor tics and a vocal tic over a period of a year before you qualify for the diagnosis of Tourette syndrome. Mm. But because tics can change, a tic a physician may see today may not be the same tic that they see later. And some tics aren't as obvious as others. So it can take quite a while. And I think parents are really the front line in terms of being educated about the condition. If you are seeing your child have a tic, just watch them. Don't tell them to stop doing it. Watch them, chronicle it. So this way, when you go to your doctor, whoever your doctor is, you can request that they evaluate based on what you are observing over a period of time. And you can also request to be referred to a neurologist, who, again, is most often the diagnosing physician.
So how do I get this disease? Is it generic, familial? Is it inherited? How can you, quote unquote, catch it?
It's highly heritable. So they have identified 5 genes that play a role in the development of Tourette syndrome. But from a genetic perspective, you would get Tourette syndrome or persistent tic disorder in the same way you might get your height or your eye color. It takes a lot of different genes to come together to create the very individualized soup that is you if you have Tourette syndrome. So it's not a singular gene; it's a multi gene process. But we do know of 5 genes that statistically play a role in the development of Tourette syndrome. And we also know that there are some distinctions between the gray and the white matter of the brain for those with Tourette syndrome and those without. So it is definitely genetic. Although there are some people who say they have it and they've never known anybody in their family, which I think, again, goes back to the diagnosis issue. We know that about half of all people living with Tourette syndrome and persistent tic disorders are going completely undiagnosed. So if you've never had a diagnosis in your family, you may believe that you're the first in your lineage to live with it when, in fact, you're not. You might very well be 5th or 6th generation.
So what would you think is the biggest challenge living with Tourette syndrome? I know you talked about the hyperactivity associated with it and the tics. What other ways can it really affect and challenge a person that has the syndrome?
Well, what we've really heard from our community is just the misunderstanding around the condition and being amongst people when you're living with it is probably one of the most challenging things. Additionally, we do know that it's not always the tics that bother people. It's the things that are underneath the surface that you don't see. It's the anxiety, it's the ADHD, it's the OCD, that depending on how an individual's day is going, those underlying conditions can exacerbate the physical manifestation of the tics. But it's really the understanding when you're out in the world, when you're in a work environment, when you're in a school environment, and you are engaging in behaviors that are involuntary, but you are constantly all day long having people look at you or tell you to stop doing that or asking you, do you have a cold? Do you need a tissue?
Yeah.
Those social elements and the ostracization that can often accompany it are very challenging. I think people with Tourette syndrome, like all of us, want to be able to live freely and amongst our peers without judgment, and to be able to live our best lives. And that can be very hard when your body's betraying you on a daily basis.
So tell us about the Tourette Association of America. What is its mission? And tell me how you guys impact this community of individuals.
So our mission is to provide support and hope to families and individuals living with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. What we do this through a 3-part mission. One is to make sure that we are making resources available to the community. So all of the information that we have, that we are putting out, so people can educate themselves and educate their doctors and, the teachers in their lives if they need to. We also do a lot of work in trying to better understand the impact of Tourette syndrome on the lives of people living with it, so we can more clearly communicate to the general public and government officials that this is a condition that many people in society are living with, and it is impacting them and the healthcare system in larger ways than many may realize, to better understand the causes of and to identify better treatments, and to really just elevate awareness, make sure that every corner of the United States of America has access to the information and knows what it is, knows what it isn't, so that people can find doctors who can give them diagnoses, teachers who will understand the accommodations that are needed in the classroom so that children can learn better, and so that people who are in the workplace don't get fired because their tics are disruptive, which is something that we see all too often. So our role is really to make sure that all of that support, all of those services, all of that understanding is being elevated and disseminated out to audiences across the country.
So do you have support groups for families and individuals to come together to share their stories and their experiences with the syndrome?
We do. We do have support groups. We have about 32 chapters across the nation that run support groups. And then we also have about 100 independent support groups that are run in local communities across the country. And then at the national level, we also provide access to support groups that are virtual, because we know not everybody is in a geographic location where they can easily commute to these support groups. So we also provide that at the national level. And we provide them for parents, for kids, for different groups within our community. So we recently had a dad's support group that was specific to fathers who may be struggling with raising their children and want to have an environment where they can safely share. We also had a group specific to the LGBTQIA community within the Tourette community. So we are really trying our best to bring as many people who are living with this condition together in safe spaces where they can really share with one another their experiences and figure out the best path forward for themselves and their families.
So you mentioned a website. Can you share that website with us?
Sure. So if you go to Tourette.org, and Tourette is spelled, because lots of people spell it wrong.
Right.
It's TOURETTE.org. So that is our website. All of our resources are available there. We also have a tool if you are looking for a provider in your area, whether you're looking for a neurologist or a pediatrician or a psychiatrist, et cetera, you can come to our website and look that up. So if you are looking for a diagnosis or just looking for additional care from somebody who is understanding of the condition, you can find them on our website. And we also have toolkits, which provide everything you would really need to know about Tourette syndrome for different audiences, for families, for providers, and for educators. And also our latest one is our law enforcement toolkit, which was something that the community indicated they really did need. As you can imagine, Tourette syndrome, if you're ticking involuntarily and driving, law enforcement can mistake that for lots of things.
Right.
So we also have that toolkit as well. And we actually have cards too that people can order and or download off of our website and print out themselves. It's an I have Tourette syndrome card, so that if you are in an environment where you are being judged and people don't understand, rather than having to explain it to everybody, you can hand them this card and show them that and say, I have Tourette syndrome. And on the card explains what the condition is so that people can understand.
So how can people get involved? If you wanted to volunteer, I know you probably do community events. How can we volunteer and become a part of the Tourette's organization?
Definitely visit our website. There is an entire page dedicated to getting involved with us. We do have events throughout the year. Our chapters are often also hosting events. Our next big event will be our national walk, which will be happening in June. I believe we're having that in Astoria Park this year. So we're always looking for people to come out and be allies, support our cause, and volunteer if that's something that folks are interested in doing. We would absolutely love for more people to get involved with what we do so that we can continue to spread the word.
Is there a cure?
There is no cure.
Okay. And is this considered a disability, the Tourette's syndrome?
It is considered a disability. It is protected under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is a protected condition, and those who have the most severe forms of it can be eligible for disability benefits and things of that nature. So it is considered a disability.
So have you ran into an individual person that had a story that impressed you with Tourette syndrome that you said, wow, that's interesting how you were able to not only be diagnosed, but now live a quote unquote normal life?
I've met so many people with stories like that, but I will say the story that I often recall easiest was not so much about the person's journey, but more about the experience of living with TS. I had an individual once say to me, the simple pleasures that you enjoy in your life, going to a restaurant with friends, sitting and watching a movie with your spouse, going to a park with your kids, all of these simple pleasures that so many people are able to enjoy, I cannot. Because my tics don't allow me to. I'm too loud. I'm disruptive. It affects everybody around me. So, and I garner negative attention because of it. So that was a story that for me really drove home the importance of what we as the Tourette Association do, because we really want to make those moments possible for those living with this condition.
So if there was one thing that you want to leave us with when it comes down to the Tourette's Association or the Tourette's disability, or if you would call it that, or disorder, what would it be?
That these behaviors are involuntary. And if you think these tics bother you, trust me, they bother the person who is exhibiting them 100 times more than you can ever possibly imagine. So educate yourself. Don't be quick to judge. And if you've learned anything today from this show, or if you learn anything from going to our website, please spread the word so that more people can walk away aware and compassionate when the moment arises.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Amanda Talty, the President and CEO of Tourette Association of America. We hope you stay safe and continue to stay healthy. And thank you for sharing this important information with us today.
Thank you, Jeanine. I so appreciate being here today.
This is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the Nursing Department here at Nassau Community College, and we want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the Nursing Department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.